Well, actually, two areas. I have to look at the length of the muscle tissue, and then I have to look at the resistance profile, which is found through examination of the resistance moment arm. So it seems as though there's been a really interesting emerging body of research over the last 3-4 years about lengthened partials versus shortened partials versus full range of motion exercise. Some of the early studies took a look at like a leg extension or maybe like a tricep extension, all of these like single joint exercises. And they just had the participants, equate volume and do a full range of motion rep or a lengthened partial, so only the part that's in the big stretch position and stopping midway, or shortened partial, so like midway to the top of the motion. And what they found was that the lengthened partial seemed to grow just as much tissue as the full range of motion rep, and that the shortened partial was significantly less growth compared to either full range or lengthened partial. So then they started to say, well, is it only the lengthened part of the movement that actually seems to be growing the tissue? And, they've done further studies to take a look at what if we kind of modify a leg extension and we put we really have them lay way back so that we put them into more hip extension? Does that grow the rectus femoris better than if they're sitting upright as they normally would in the seat? And it does. It seems to create a more prolific growth response by putting the muscle into greater length during the exercise performance. So it was kind of like, wow, length. Everything should have length. And then, there's been a couple clever studies that have played around with the resistance profile. One in particular that took a look at an incline bench dumbbell curl versus a preacher curl with a dumbbell. So if you're doing an incline bench dumbbell curl and you're laying back onto the incline bench, your arms are hanging down by your side. At the bottom of that exercise is the most lengthened part for the bicep. And in that place, the dumbbell is basically directly under the elbow joint. And so when you're talking about moment arms, the resistance moment arm is the horizontal distance between the working joint and where the load is. So if the dumbbell is directly under the elbow, there's basically no resistance moment arm. There's no horizontal distance. As you lift the dumbbell up, you're moving the dumbbell horizontally further away from the elbow. You're increasing the resistance moment arm as the exercise shortens. With an exercise like that, you're biasing the mid-range, and because as you go into the short position, it's coming back towards the elbow, so you're decreasing the moment arm. So, the torque is the only real thing that matters, okay? And torque is the combination of load and the horizontal distance away from the rotating joint. So an incline dumbbell curl would favor more of a mid to short position of a biceps versus a preacher curl. As you're lowering it, the dumbbell horizontally continues to move further and further away from the elbow. So it's biasing, there's more and more torque as it gets longer and longer and longer. This study showed that the preacher curl significantly outperformed the incline curl from a biceps growth perspective. And it's sort of leading towards this idea that if you really want to create a great growth exercise, you want to feature this combination of reaching a point of muscular length and combining it with a large resistance moment arm. So you can really start to look at exercises and say, well, a dumbbell lateral raise doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense from this lens, because the stretched part for the shoulder is the bottom and the dumbbell is directly underneath the shoulder. And the hardest part is the top where the muscle is very short. Now, if you encounter something like that, there's solutions. You can always use a cable and change the angle of the cable so that it's, going to bias the lengthened part for the deltoid. You start to look at compound exercises and you realize why they're so effective, because in a squat, for instance, as you're lowering the weight, the weight now stays over midfoot, but the knees and hips are horizontally moving away from the location of the load. So the horizontal distance between the working joints and the load is increasing due to the movement of the joints. And you get a sense of why deeper squats tend to work better for promoting growth, because the lower you go, the more that the joints move away from midline. So the more torque you're putting on those tissues and joints. And, long story long, like the tension variable is probably the most critical piece. And so tension increases as you move joints away from, as the horizontal distance between the joint and the load increases, torque increases. And the muscle has to create more tension to match or overcome the resistance torque demands that are being placed on it. Length is an avenue into tension, is what I think is emerging from all of the analysis on this. So if I can anchor parts of the body appropriately and give the person support and feedback, and then drive length and torque into the exercise, I probably have the best case scenario from an exercise selection standpoint, as long as the person is putting enough effort into every set to where the velocity drops off significantly by the end and they're really getting close to failure.
So I